Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
Nobody expected the Daily Show legend Jon Stewart to lose his cool on live TV, but when Meghan Markle joined him to discuss narratives, truth, and media responsibility, things spiraled fast. What began as a tense but civil conversation turned into a heated, personal clash, with both exchanging sharp words, the studio audience gasping, and social media exploding in real time. By the end of the segment, Stewart had done something no one could remember him ever doing before. He told Meghan Markle to leave his set. This is the story of the debate that broke the internet.
The studio lights came up in a soft gold hue, bathing the set in a warm, almost cozy glow. Jon Stewart, ever the picture of composed satire, sat behind the sleek desk with his usual wry smile. He leaned forward just slightly, the way he always did when he wanted the audience to feel like they were all in on the joke. "Joining us tonight," he said, with the kind of deliberate pause that could build a skyscraper's worth of suspense, "is an author, activist, and one of the most talked-about public figures of the last decade, Meghan Markle." The audience applauded politely, some clapping enthusiastically, others with that measured TV show energy. Meghan walked out in a tailored cream pantsuit, her smile radiant but calculated. She shook Jon's hand, took her seat, and crossed her legs with grace, the picture of poise. "Thank you for having me, Jon," Meghan began, her voice smooth, the practiced calm of someone who'd been media-trained to within an inch of her life. "I'm excited to have an honest conversation." "Honest is what we do here," Jon replied, smirking. "Sometimes too honest. My lawyers keep reminding me." The audience chuckled. The first few minutes were easy, even charming. They touched on her charity work, her upcoming book about media literacy, and the importance of telling your own story. Jon nodded along, occasionally dropping a sly quip that earned soft laughter. Meghan matched his tone, offering little smiles, careful to seem unshaken. But there was an undercurrent, a slight shift when Jon brought up the phrase, "controlling the narrative." "You talk a lot about reclaiming your narrative," Jon said, resting his elbows on the desk. "But critics, and there are quite a few, say that sometimes it feels like you're rewriting events in your favor. How do you respond to that?" Meghan's smile flickered, just for a second. "I think that's an unfair framing, Jon," she said, leaning in slightly. "It's not about rewriting, it's about correcting falsehoods that were weaponized against me. There's a difference." "Sure. But then where's the line between correction and spin? Because everyone thinks their version is the truth." The air shifted. The audience gave a low murmur. Meghan kept her tone light, but her words carried a sharp edge. "The difference is that my version is backed by facts and lived experience. Spin is what tabloids do. Truth is what I'm doing." Jon's eyebrow arched, the first subtle sign of friction. "And the rest of us just have to take your word for it?" "I'd hope you'd take the word of a woman who's been relentlessly targeted by misinformation," Meghan countered, her voice tightening. "Oh, I take a lot of people's word for things. Doesn't mean I don't ask questions. It's kind of my job." The audience reacted, a mix of oohs and low chuckles. Meghan took a sip of water, her fingers tapping lightly against the mug. For the next few exchanges, the conversation teetered between polite and pointed. Meghan emphasized the emotional toll of public attacks. Jon pressed on accountability for public figures. It was subtle, but you could see the shift in posture, Meghan's chin lifting just slightly higher, Jon's smile thinning into something more calculating. By the time the first commercial break rolled around, what began as a pleasant interview now had the unmistakable hum of two people circling each other, each deciding just how far they were willing to push. When the lights dimmed for the ad break, Meghan leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on Jon with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He, in turn, shuffled his notes with deliberate calm. The real conversation was about to begin.
The applause faded as the cameras came back from commercial. Jon shuffled his cards, then placed them aside, a quiet signal that things were about to go off script. "So, Meghan," he began, leaning forward, "we were talking about truth and spin before the break. Let me ask you this. Do you think there's ever a point where telling your story becomes monetizing it?" The audience reacted instantly, a ripple of murmurs and a few audible gasps. Meghan's expression didn't falter, but her shoulders stiffened. "If people are interested in hearing my story, and I've worked hard to share it authentically, why shouldn't I have control over how it's told?" Jon's voice was calm, but his words cut. "Because at some point, when there's a Netflix deal, a book deal, a Spotify deal, it stops being just telling your truth and starts looking like brand management." A low, sharp laugh escaped Meghan. "So a man can have a career, monetize his expertise, share his life, and be called a success story, but a woman does it and it's brand management?" The audience clapped, a few cheering in agreement. Jon nodded slightly, acknowledging the point, but didn't back down. "I think it's brand management when anyone, man or woman, curates their life for profit, while insisting it's purely about truth." Meghan's voice dipped lower, the politeness cracking just a touch. "And I think it's a lazy narrative to dismiss someone's survival as marketing just because you don't like how they've chosen to survive." The audience reacted again, louder this time. Jon's eyes narrowed slightly, but he smiled. "Survival, sure, but you're not exactly living paycheck to paycheck, are you? When you're speaking from a position of privilege, isn't it fair for people to question how much of your struggle is relatable?" That landed. Meghan shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs. "Privilege doesn't erase trauma, Jon, and it's telling that people are more comfortable policing how I heal than addressing the systems that cause the harm." Jon raised an eyebrow. "But healing usually involves letting go of the spotlight. You seem pretty comfortable under it." That drew an audible ooh from the audience. Meghan tilted her head, smiling, but her tone sharpened. "And you seem pretty comfortable assuming you know my motives." Jon leaned back in his chair, spreading his hand slightly. "I'm just asking questions. That's what people at home want to know." Meghan's eyes glinted. "Or maybe that's what you want to push because it makes for good TV." The audience erupted, half clapping, half murmuring in anticipation. Jon gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "Look, I'm not your enemy here, but you've built a platform on saying, 'Here's my side, believe me.' And I'm saying if you're going to hold others accountable, you've got to be ready to be held accountable yourself." "I am ready," she shot back. "I've been ready for years. What I'm not ready for is another man trying to tell me my truth is too polished to be real." The audience was now buzzing, almost electric. Jon didn't break eye contact. "And I'm not ready to pretend that media control isn't part of the game you're playing. You're smart enough to know it is, I'm just calling it what it is." A sharp silence hung between them, that rare intoxicating moment where a talk show stops being a talk show and becomes something raw, unscripted, and combustible. Meghan broke it with a slow, deliberate smile. "Then maybe you should spend less time calling things out and more time asking why they exist." The applause was deafening this time, but Jon's smile didn't falter. "Oh, we'll get to the why, but we're not skipping the what." The camera zoomed in slightly, two people locked in a conversation that was now more like a verbal chess match, each move sharper than the last. If the first act had been a polite dance, this was the moment the gloves started coming off. By now, the air in the studio felt different, heavier, charged, as though everyone knew they'd crossed the threshold from polite conversation into something else entirely. Jon shifted forward again, elbows on the desk. "All right, let's stop circling this. You've talked a lot about speaking truth to power, Meghan, but some people feel you've turned personal grievances into a full-time profession. Meghan didn't flinch. If standing up for myself feels like a profession, maybe it's because I've had to do it non-stop since I entered the public eye. Jon's tone softened just enough to seem almost concerned. But at what cost? You've cut ties, you've burned bridges, family, institutions, even friends. Do you ever stop and wonder if maybe it's not just them? That one hit. Her jaw tightened. The audience murmured. Meghan's reply was measured, but there was steel in it. I think about that every day, Jon. I think about the people I trusted who sold stories about me. I think about the relatives who smiled in my face and stabbed me in the back. So if you're asking if I've reflected, I have. And I decided I'd rather have a small circle I can trust than a big one that betrays me. Jon nodded slowly, but then dropped his next line like a stone into still water. Even if that circle just ends up being you? The reaction from the crowd was instant, a mix of gasps and low whistles. Meghan blinked, the faintest flash of hurt crossing her face before she smoothed it away. That's the kind of comment, she said, her voice cool but clipped, that makes people shut down, because instead of seeing someone who survived, you paint them as someone who's just alone. And that's supposed to be shameful. Jon leaned in, voice quieter now, but cutting through the silence. It's not about shame. It's about the fact that sometimes when every bridge burns, maybe you've got to ask if you're the one holding the match. The studio was dead silent, except for the faint hum of cameras. Meghan's eyes locked on his, unblinking. You have no idea what it's like to have your entire life dissected by strangers who think they know you because they've read a headline. And when you try to correct the record, they say you're playing the victim. That's the trap, Jon. No matter what I do, I lose in their eyes. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for a moment you could see the emotional toll under the polished exterior. Jon saw it too, but didn't pull back. I'm not saying your pain isn't real. I'm saying when you turn it into content, it changes how people see it. You want to be understood, but you've also got to understand why some people think it's performative. Meghan's tone sharpened again, like she just snapped a piece of glass in her hand. Performative is pretending not to care when people are tearing you apart. Performative is sitting behind this desk asking me about my motives when you know damn well that people in your industry profit from the very headlines that make my life hell. That landed hard. Jon leaned back, lips pressed together in a tight line. The audience erupted into applause, not just polite, but loud and sustained, like they'd been waiting for her to land a hit. But Meghan didn't stop there. You don't get to be the guy who calls out corruption everywhere else and then go easy on the media machine when it benefits you. Jon gave a small, humorless chuckle. Fair, but you also don't get to play the rebel while building an empire off the very attention you say you hate. The tension was unbearable now, two people who weren't just debating anymore, but exposing each other's contradictions in real time. Meghan's eyes softened just slightly, but her words stayed pointed. Maybe we're both guilty of using the system we claim to challenge. The difference is, I never pretended not to have skin in the game. That made Jon pause. For the first time all night, he didn't have a quick comeback. He just looked at her, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Not victory, but recognition. The audience could feel it. This wasn't just a clash anymore. This was the point where two opponents realized they were also mirrors. The segment producer signaled from offstage, 1 minute until commercial. But neither of them broke eye contact. And in that moment, it was clear. The fight wasn't over. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost glaring, as if they sensed the tension building. The audience was no longer comfortably shifting in their seats. They were leaning forward, eyes wide, locked on the drama unfolding at the table. Jon Stewart's jaw was tight, his voice calm but edged with something sharp. "Meghan, I think you're confusing public accountability with personal persecution," he said. "You can't use your platform to say whatever you want and then act shocked when people challenge it. That's not how the world works." Meghan Markle sat up straighter, her tone dipping into something more cutting. "And I think you're confusing free speech with open season on someone's life," she shot back. "It's easy to stand on your soapbox when you've never been followed, harassed, and vilified simply for existing." Jon leaned back in his chair, lips pressed together. "I've been vilified plenty," he said quietly, "but I didn't make myself untouchable by declaring that any criticism was an attack on my humanity. You're in the public eye. You wanted influence. That comes with the territory." The audience murmured, a low, unsettled sound, like they weren't sure who to agree with anymore. Meghan's hands gripped the edge of the table. "I wanted a voice. I wanted to help, but apparently that's only acceptable if I say things that don't make people uncomfortable." Jon's tone hardened. "You wanted a voice? Then use it responsibly, not as a shield, not as a weapon to silence other voices. Responsibility is the other half of influence." The pause that followed was long enough to feel like a dare. Meghan's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. Jon gave a slow shake of his head, muttering almost under his breath, just loud enough for the mics to pick it up. "This is exhausting." The room went still. Jon glanced toward the producer's booth, then turned back to Meghan. He said, "I think we're done here," pushing his chair back. His mic picked up the scrape of the legs against the stage floor, a sound that felt like a gavel slamming down. Meghan blinked. "Excuse me?" Jon stood, his height casting a shadow over the table. "I said we're done. You've turned this into a pity parade instead of a real conversation. If you can't engage without playing the victim card, then I'm not wasting my breath." The gasp from the audience was almost theatrical, like a single collective intake of air. Meghan's lips parted in shock, but Jon was already stepping away from the table. "Jon," Whoopi began, rising slightly from her seat, but Jon just held up a hand. "Nope, I'm not doing it. You all can carry on, but I'm not sitting here pretending this is a discussion when it's just a performance." The cameras followed him as he walked off stage, leaving Meghan frozen in her chair, her expression shifting from disbelief to simmering anger. The View's crew scrambled, one camera panning back to Meghan, another catching Joy Behar leaning forward as if she was about to say something snide, but thinking better of it. On Twitter, the moment was already viral before the segment even wrapped. Clips of Jon's "I think we're done here" were being shared with captions like "Jon Stewart just ended Meghan Markle" and "That walk-off was iconic." Others accused Jon of silencing a woman of color and proving her point about media hostility. Instagram lit up with split-screen memes, Jon Stewart walking off on one side, Meghan's shocked face on the other, overlaid with captions like, "When your date starts talking about star signs," and "Me at 5 p.m. on a Friday." The producers cut to a commercial break sooner than usual, the set still buzzing with awkward, unsettled energy. Meghan adjusted her blazer, staring into the middle distance, while the co-hosts whispered to each other behind their mugs. When they returned from break, Jon was gone. The chair where he had sat was empty, a silent, glaring reminder that this wasn't a bit, it was a walk-off, and it had just happened live on national television. By the next morning, the walk-off had become the story. Every major entertainment site, political blog, and morning news show replayed the clip in slow motion, Jon Stewart pushing his chair back, Meghan Markle's stunned expression, the audible gasp from the audience. Fox News called it a masterclass in shutting down performative victimhood. MSNBC framed it as a disturbing display of male privilege overpowering a woman's lived experience. The View's own social media team, they stayed quiet, posting nothing but a generic, "Thank you to our guests today" caption that fooled no one. Clips flooded TikTok, some set to dramatic movie scores, others edited with exaggerated sound effects like a wrestling smackdown. One creator racked up 4 million views in 24 hours with a side-by-side of the walk-off and a mic drop from an old Jon Stewart Daily Show episode. But in the days that followed, the online conversation shifted from the moment itself to what it represented. For Jon's supporters, the walk-off was a stand against what they saw as a growing trend, public figures dodging accountability by framing any criticism as harassment. They flooded comment sections with phrases like, "Finally, someone said it," and "We need more people willing to walk away from bad faith debates." For Meghan's defenders, it was yet another example of how women, especially women of color, are dismissed and demeaned when they speak up. They trended hashtags like "Let Women Speak" and "Stand with Meghan," arguing that Jon's exit wasn't strength, but weakness disguised as principle. Jon, for his part, didn't hide. 2 days later, he addressed it on his own podcast. "I didn't walk off because she disagreed with me. I walked off because it stopped being a conversation. When every point is reframed as an attack, dialogue dies, and I'm not interested in performing outrage for ratings." Meghan waited longer, 4 days to respond, choosing Instagram for her statement. "I went on that show to talk about the ways media can harm. Instead, I became an example of it. I respect Jon's work, but I wish he'd stayed at the table. Walking away sends a message too, and not always the one you intend." The post garnered over 1 million likes in 12 hours. Comments were split between heart emojis and accusations of playing the victim. Within a week, think pieces emerged. Titles like "The Day Civility Walked Off Stage" and "Was Jon Stewart Right to Leave?" Academics weighed in. So did comedians. So did Meghan's fan base, who flooded Twitter with old clips of her giving speeches, arguing she'd been consistent all along. The View saw a ratings bump, of course. The episode re-aired in a primetime slot that Friday, introduced by a voiceover calling it one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television this year. Months later, the walk-off was still cited in online debates. Some treated it like a cautionary tale, proof that our cultural discourse is so brittle, even seasoned professionals can't make it through a heated discussion without blowing it up. Others saw it as a line in the sand, a moment when one person simply refused to play the game anymore. And every time the clip resurfaced, the same questions lit up comment threads. Was Jon Stewart right to walk away? Was Meghan Markle right to stand her ground? Or, more unsettling, was nobody really listening to each other in the first place? No matter where people landed, one truth was undeniable. That day on The View had carved itself into the pop culture memory. It wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a snapshot of a bigger, messier cultural fight about speech, responsibility, identity, and the breaking points we don't see coming until someone's chair scrapes back and they say, "I think we're done here."